Prescot lanes, medieval tales within the veins, ghosts of Shakespeare in the air, timeless stories told with care. History lives in every street, echoes where past and present meet. Prescot town's treasure found, ancient magic all around. Cobblestones and market squares, fabled charm beyond compare. Boundaries of a town so grand, Shakespeare's whisper in the sand. History lives in every street, echoes where past and present.
Before I do anything, I'll better introduce myself. My name's Philip Battle. I'm a vlogger. I do local history vlogs on Prescot on YouTube. I've got a YouTube channel, that's why we're doing this for YouTube. But I've also set up Born and Raised in Prescot, which is a local history page, which I set up about 10 years ago now. And we've got something between the two, between YouTube and that, about 15,000 subscribers. So a lot of people will see this video and see what we do. I was born and raised in Prescot. I was actually grew up on Kemble Street there, and my photograph is on the placard down there. And there's a little story about me being the most popular boy in Prescot at one time. Not necessarily today, but I'm not exactly a boy anymore. But yeah, there's a little thing back down there. So we're going to have a little walk around Prescot. It's not so much planned as drifting, because it's a lovely day. So we're here at the Shakespeare North Playhouse, so we'll talk a bit about this theatre. And as you know, as you possibly know, it opened in July, on the 15th of July 2022. So this year it's 3 years old basically. It was designed by Nick Helm, a London architect, and it's really interesting. I think it's really interesting, although online there's been a lot of debate about whether it should be, it's a carbuncle, it's a white elephant, and it should be knocked down again and made into a car park. It's built on what was Highfield Place, which was a highly populated part of Prescot. In the 1930s and 40s, it was declared a slum. It was a slum and it was cleared. This theatre is actually built upon a slum. Well, it was built upon a car park that before that was a slum, and before that was a high field where it used to be ploughed, and that's where it got the name Highfield from. And it was originally called the Globe of the North. So when they were planning this, it was known as the Prescot Globe, or the Globe of the North. There was a number of places it was meant to be, or it was planned to be, and one of them was in Preston. It was going to be in Preston at one time, and it was also going to be in Horton at one time as well. And there were even talks about it being in Rufford, 3 different places. So how did it end up in Prescot? It was because of one man, basically. In 1951, a local historian called FAB, well, I like to call him Fab, in other words, Francis Arthur Bailey, and he discovered the only purpose-built Elizabethan theatre outside London was built in Prescot. Here, purpose-built, think about that. This is a theatre, this is the early times of theatre. The only one outside London was built in Prescot, and there is evidence of that documented, and it was at the other end of Eccleston Street, just down here, and it was known as the Prescot Playhouse, and that's where this playhouse got its name from, is the Prescot Playhouse. And that's the deciding factor that made the architects and everybody else think that it should be a Prescot, a theatre of North in Prescot. Now, there's no evidence that Shakespeare ever came to Prescot. There's no evidence of it at all. There's no documentary evidence to say he came here. It's like looking for a planet on a distant star. You can't see it, but you know it's there because the evidence is there. So it's circumstantial evidence that he was here. It doesn't matter really, because the main thing is we've got a theatre here, and it's magnificent theatre. I think it's beautiful, the architecture, in spite of what other people say. I suppose you know about how it's built. Do you know about why it's built like this? No? Oh, okay. It's got this sort of zigzaggy thing going on at the front here, and the zigzaggy thing carries on with the windows there. Now that represents an Elizabethan ruff, kind of like a collar that goes round, and that was supposed to go round the entire building. But they shaved 2 million off the cost of the building. So the roof only actually goes down this end, but it's supposed to go round the side here. I've got the actual architectural drawings here that actually show, in fact you can pass this round, you can see the zigzaggy things go all the way around the building, and they go on the other side as well, but that was shaved off. You can see that there. So you can pass that around and have a look at that. That's the actual architectural drawings of the outside of the theatre. So if we go down here, we'll just go round here. You can come down here. You will see that this bit on that drawing is, well, that drawing shows the zigzaggy bit on this side, but here it's totally flat. So they've just gone for the El Cheapo bit and just gone, right, okay, that'll save 1 million off, so we'll make that flat there, which the architect was absolutely livid by. We met him on the opening ceremony, and he was effing and blinding. Well, he wasn't actually effing and blinding, he was just, he did say a few words though. And also the tops of the walls have this white cladding on, which was supposed to be invisible, which that was just supposed to be a wall that finished at that point. It wasn't supposed to have any cladding on. It was supposed to look like that wall there, where it's just straight, the wall finishes. So they've had to put that cladding on for various reasons, but that was a cost-cutting exercise as well. So it's not what it was supposed to be. Also, this was supposed to have a canopy going on, like a sort of like a cover that covered the doorway there, which that wasn't built, and there was supposed to be some kind of architectural feature over here for this kind of performance space. So it's not as it was supposed to be, but it's still, I think it's still a nice building. It's got some nice features. I particularly like the brickwork in places and the way it's been finished off. I like the floating wall at the end there. It reminds me very much, it has echoes to the National Theatre on the West Bank of London. If you've been to the National Theatre, you'll know what I mean. It's got a brutalist heritage to it, although inside it's very much about the wooden structure of the cockpit, but the outside is very brutalist. Now it's very radical for Prescot. This it created a lot of debate and a lot of bad feeling about it. People calling it a white elephant and saying, well, you know, they'll turn it into a swimming pool and stuff like that. You know, when Shakespeare won't do any good in Prescot. Well, thankfully they haven't turned it into. I'm a great supporter of the theatre. So I want to show you another radical piece of architecture, but it's from a different age. So we're going to walk down here and we'll have a look onto Church Street. We haven't rehearsed this, have we? No. We're just making it up as we go along. So we'll just go over here. Okay. By the way, if anyone wants to ask any questions, you can do. I don't know if I'll know the answers to it, but I'm not actually an historian, by the way, just in case. Did I say that to you? I'm not actually an historian. I'm like, imagine me. Sorry?
I picked you up as one too.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just going to...
He's very much.
I might as well say now. No, I might as well say that I'm not actually... If I paint a picture... Okay. Director.
Sorry.
If I paint a picture, right, myself, if you imagine a doctor, right, I'm a doctor, right, and Catherine's my nurse, right, okay, so I come round to your house and have a look down your throat, so, yeah, you've got tonsillitis, mate, God, tonsillitis, so have you got kitchen table? Yeah, okay, let's get you on the kitchen table then, alright? So I sort of got, like, take your tonsils out on the kitchen table, and have you got a bin? Yeah, throw them in the bin. Catherine will do all the swabbing up, won't you? Right, so that's me. I'm kind of like an unqualified doctor who will come around to your house and I'll operate on you and do all that. Now, I actually knew a doctor who was like that, Dr. Sarnby, and I have stories about Dr. Sarnby because I lived in his house. But anyway, that's what I am. I'm sort of like not qualified to do what I do, but I do it anyway. In fact, the unqualified people make the best doctors. So, another radical piece of architecture. You wouldn't think it, would you? You wouldn't think it. That's a very old building. Now, if Shakespeare was alive and he came here, he wouldn't recognise any of this, apart from this bit here, which dates from 1410. Now, remember, Shakespeare visited if he visited 1585 to 1595, so he would have recognised that bit straight away. That bit there, just that bit. Okay? The rest of it was built in 1610. The rest of the church, that is, was built in 1610. When Shakespeare was here, it was described as dilapidated and ruinous. That's because it was a Catholic church and it had undergone it had been run down basically because of Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries and the Catholic faith. And so all Catholic churches had become dilapidated. There's no money put into them. The Catholics went into hiding. Certain parts of Prescot, it was still carried out because this was remote, remember? But the church was in ruins. Anyway, the Protestant elite who took over turned it into a Church of England church. So they rebuilt it in 1610. And it was...
You rebuilt it in 1610?
Yeah.
How many churches were there?
There were about, well, there's documented about four churches on this site before that.
What era? What day?
Well, the first one was Anglo-Saxon because it was probably 4th century, so it's probably a wooden church, 4th century on this spot. And then it was rebuilt and rebuilt. And this is the final one. Most of it is from 1610, apart from this one, which was from 1410, that bit there. That's the only bit that's earlier on. But there is a font inside the church that's Anglo-Saxon that dates from at least the 6th century. That's still in the church there. So that was, that's as we see it today. So Shakespeare wouldn't have known that bit. When it was rebuilt, the church, it still had a medieval tower. So the tower was much earlier. The medieval tower, not the tower you see now, but the medieval one was there, and it was probably had a wooden spire to it as well. But that was struck by lightning in about 1700s, something like that. So eventually it was rebuilt. The tower was rebuilt, and it was actually finished off in 1729. The architect was Nicholas Hawksworth, who was a pupil of Sir Christopher Wren, who built St Paul's Cathedral. It's built in the late Baroque Renaissance style. For its time, it was totally radical. It was as radical for its time as the Shakespeare North is today for Prescot. People think of the Shakespeare North, we don't want a modern building there, we want something that's like the church or like, you know, some of the old buildings. We want that, we don't want a radical building. But this shows how forward-thinking the Prescotianers were in the 1700s. Is to build something like that. Prescot had never seen anything like that. It was an incredible tower and spire. The tower goes up to 75 feet in height. That's just the tower, up to the balustrades there. The balustrades and the balcony, I suppose you'd call it, that's 75 feet. The spire itself is also 75 feet. It's in perfect symmetry. Perfect symmetry. Some bits of it, like some bits of the Shakespeare North, hark back to an earlier time. The double windowed belfry, see this louvered belfry there? Yeah. That goes back to the old Anglo-Saxon churches. That style can be traced back to that period. There are also other styles on it that link it to the 14th and the 17th century. So it was echoing styles of earlier buildings, but it was radical. It was, people were up in arms about it. We don't want a tower like that. We want the old medieval tower back. Why can't we have that, you know? So people do look at these buildings now and think, well, that is classical architecture. I think it's one of the most beautiful buildings in Prescot. So I'm really pleased that it's got that link. You know, I always look at it and think of that link. Now, the purpose for the tower, by the way, was to hold the bells, obviously, and to tell the time. And the steeples, but they used to have things called steeple chases, where they would go from one church to another. All the apprentices would race to the church, to race to the steeple. And there was steeple chases between Huyton and Chilwell, because there's three churches. There was three churches in a row, and you could actually see them back in the day. And they would use that as a landmark. So it is a landmark, right? The church is a landmark, and that's why it's got a spire on it. It is to make a point, because it was the tallest building in southwest Lancashire at the time. And it's only about 4 or 5 miles from the Mersey, so you can actually see it from the Mersey. If you ever get a chance to go up there, it is fascinating, and I think they are working at having guided tours up the tower, and but it's about health and safety, so they're just trying to sort that out.
Anybody been on? Yeah.
Have you been up the tower? Yeah. What was it like? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I did, and it's a fantastic view, but it's very narrow.
Yeah.
It's the top that was the.
And you sort of have to pull yourself up through like an opening.
Yeah.
Like a trapdoor, you have to jump into it.
Yeah. So they need to sort that out and have little trips up there, because I think it'd be fabulous, a fabulous addition to the town. It's all built in red sandstone, which was supposedly to be the highest quality sandstone. It was all mined locally. There was, in fact, the sandstone quarry down at the bottom of Sewell Street. That was, so we're not quite sure where it's from, the sandstone, but it is a local sandstone, so it's been told. The Courtleigh, it was. There was only about 400 people who lived in Prescot at the time of Shakespeare's thing, and for a long time that number was about the same, 400 people, until the sort of late 1700s, early 1800s. The population just started to boom, mainly because of the watch trade and then through industrialisation. So the courtly took all the, they did all the administering of justice, but it was usually just petty stuff, you know. If they could banish you from the town, that was often
I thought it was bigger.
a good punishment. Yeah, it was bigger, but it was a small township. But the township of Prescot is not the parish of Prescot. The parish of Prescot was something else. The parish of Prescot was the 15 townships of Prescot. And if you look at this church, for such a small, you can actually walk round the boundary of the township of Prescot in a couple of hours, which I've done. I've actually documented that. So you walk around the township. It's tiny, right? But the parish is massive, and it was the biggest parish, Prescot parish, in southwest Lancashire. There was 15 townships part of the parish, and it's something like 57 square miles all around. It went right the way up to Rainford, right the way down to Widnes, and all of St Helens and Sutton and all places like that. And so it was a big parish, so it's very wealthy. It's a very wealthy, and the mother church was Prescot, and that's why the church is so big, because for a small township you would only expect a small church, small parish church almost, you know, like a parish church. This is that's a massive church for a big congregation. So people would come in from Prescot from far and wide, not just to sell their wares, but to pay their tithes and stuff like that, because it was a very agricultural based system.
Okay, thanks
So
for that.
yeah, we shall move on. So this building here is known as the Dean's House. That was originally the deanery. It's a church building basically, and so all these buildings here, all church officials and stuff would be housed in these buildings down at Vicarage Place. Now there's an old tradition in Prescot that when you got married you would enter through that door into the church, but you would always come here. All this was a churchyard, by the way. It wasn't as open plan as it is now, so that you would come in the church, but before you went into church you'd have to follow a little ritual, and that would be to just kind of like pat this little hand here, just for good luck, just to say I hope I've done the right thing here. Oh dear me, that little thing, that's been there since the early 1800s, and it's known as a benchmark, and it basically has no good luck significance at all. It's just that people saw it as being a little baby's hand almost, and they would pat it for good luck. So that was something that people did before they got married. The church now is known as St Mary's the Blessed Virgin, but originally it was All Saints, and the idea that it's an All Saints church gives you the impression that it was much older. This plaque here, does anyone know what that is?
I guess it's the Ella Derby crest, I guess.
Yeah.
No?
No? No. Okay, that's the arms of King's College, Cambridge, and they were the landowners of Prescot. Originally, that was on the old town hall that was built in 1755, which looked like that. That's the old town hall. I see I've got some pictures of that. So that was the old town hall. and that was actually demolished. That was in Marketplace, and that was demolished in 1962.
Yeah, I remember it.
You remember that? Well,
See, I think the people at the back can't.
well, I just the Old Town Hall, Prescot.
Oh wow.
So that plaque actually was there. You can just see it. You can just see that.
Yeah.
It's actually there. It's the only piece of the town hall that's still visible in Prescot. So, yeah, in 1962, it was the only bit that was saved, and that was, and it's painted up. It wasn't originally painted back then. The church here, Our Lady Immaculate and St Joseph's Catholic Church. It's a very interesting church. And it was actually no, it's built in.
Yeah, it was. It was 17. This was my church.
This was your church.
Yeah. I got
Okay.
a portico now, but this.
Okay. Well, I've got a date on it. I've got to contradict you because this.
Well, if you go to portico,
Yeah.
it tells you portico. Portico was built earlier than this,
Right.
and it tells you in portico they started building this in 17 something.
Oh, right. So
17 something. Okay.
perhaps that's when it was.
I'll tell you what I know about it then, because obviously I wasn't there, and I'm still
But you are now.
I'm still a doctor. I'm here now, but it's actually designed by Joseph Hanson, who designed the Hanson cab, which you may be familiar with.
Yeah.
Hanson cab, and it's one you people from all over the world come to this church who are interested in the architecture of Joseph Hanson. There's remarkable features in this church that sort of like pioneered that other people still admire today. So most of it's been ripped out, unfortunately it's been destroyed, but some of it still does remain. So architectural students still come here to study this church, which is fascinating. Yeah, most of it, as far as I know, dates from Victorian times, but you're saying it's from 17.
Whether portico's wrong, I don't know. It's just that it's
Yeah.
portico church because it's an older church portico.
Yeah, I know it is. Yeah,
And it just says, I think it was the late 17.
right,
Might be like,
right. Okay,
it does say 17.
okay.
Sometimes they don't always
yeah,
make
17.6.
the dates available fully. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The passageway, I'll just tell you about this passageway down here, is said to be a very old passageway that led down to the wood. So this is medieval in origin. One side of the wall is older than the other side of the wall, and it was a place where parishioners, Prescotians could come and gather wood from the wood down there, which was a common woodland, and they could use it for lighting fires and building houses and stuff like that a long time ago. So if you want to get a feel for the oldest part of Prescot, this is the place to go. Now we can actually go down there, but it depends. If you haven't got time, we'll go down this way. Let's go this way as well.
University of Cambridge out the land here. They were buying stuff up.
No. It was donated to the college by King Henry the Sixth.
Right.
As a way of raising money for the King's College, Cambridge. And so the land was owned by them, and because it was a very wealthy parish, yeah, you could say that Prescot actually built St King's College, Cambridge, literally, and it still owns land here today. A lot of the land is still owned by King's College, Cambridge. Yeah. 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 So you imagine in medieval times, in the 6th century, there was just a church on this spot, and the churchyard actually just went round the church itself. It didn't extend down here at all. It didn't extend down there, so it's just a circular churchyard, which was typical of Anglo-Saxon churches post the Roman invasion after 410. So it was circular, and the streets of Prescot, if you want to know where the oldest parts of Prescot are, it's in the streets themselves, because the streets haven't changed. One of the most fascinating things about Prescot is it's kept its medieval street layout, and it's probably the finest street layout in the southwest Lancashire, that actually you can document it as being medieval, and it comes out like 5 fingers. All the streets come out as 5 fingers, and from that you can tell what was important to Prescot and where the trading partners are, because if you look at most of the street layout and the way the streets are going, they're going in that direction, which is the east. They're all going in that direction. 1 or 2 are going down here. They were lanes basically, and all the buildings in the old town were built in that direction. You've got Eccleston Street and Kemble Street and High Street and even Sewell Street down there. They're all built in that direction, and that's because most of the trade with Prescot was from the east. It was from places like Wigan, and it was from Warrington and all places east basically. Liverpool was just a little fishing village. There was no point in going that way. There was nothing to the south here, which was just the Mersey and a few hamlets basically. So all our trading partners was in the east, which was East Lancashire basically. That's where the trade came from, and that's where the turnpike road eventually was leading from as well, until the growth of Liverpool, which is in the 1600s, when it started to grow as a port, and empire building and stuff like that, where Liverpool took over a lot of things. But before that time, our future and our trade was in that direction. Now it's 5 miles or 4 miles, as the bird flows, to the Mersey that way, and it's a typical settlement for a medieval town, because they didn't like to base themselves on the river. They had to be most medieval towns in Britain are based away from the water basically, and we're lucky here because we had marshland going down to the Mersey there, and we had mossland going to the north, which gave us a certain amount of protection. And the reason you didn't want your town based upon the river was because you were liable for raiding. People would just come down the river and raid your houses, or, you know, ransack you, whatever. But you were more likely to attack on the river, so that's why you build it inland a bit, for a bit of protection. And also we were on the frontier of Mercia, so this was Northumberland and that was Mercia on that side, 6th century. So Mercia was a hostile county basically. There were incursions in and out. It was like being on the front line. It was like having a you know, being Ukraine on one side and Russia on the other. It was kind of like that kind of, so it was a frontier place to be, you know. So that's why this was an ideal place. Also, there's a great supply of water. Underground streams were flowing here, and the coal, lots of coal you could get coal off the surface. So there's open cast mining here. So they've been burning coal since prehistoric times. So coal was easily abundant here. So water and coal and wood and other resources is a perfect place to have a monastic cell. And so I have argued the fact that Prescot could be older than that, even going back to the Iron Age. And my thinking behind that is quite simply because we had a watch industry, but before that we had tool makers, and before that we had metal workers, and after the watch industry we had the BI, and there's been that endless thread of metal working right through Prescot's history, and you can look at it as being one led to the other, led to the other, led to the other. Because somebody said to me on Facebook, why watchmaking here? Why did watchmaking develop in Prescot? And why do we have the BI? Well, it's all linked. There are links, if you look at them, to why that happened. And if you want to create a lovely watch and have a watch industry, we're better to do it in an out of the way place. It's like an artist going into a studio and creating something beautiful, and that's what Prescot watches were. They were something beautiful and world class, and they made them here in Prescot, in this out of the way place, this remote place, and it was still called a remote place in the 1800s. So yeah, that's how history kind of develops for me, and I see that happening all the time. We'll go down to Marketplace anyway. Let's have a look at my notes, just in case. I did make a load of notes, but I haven't referred to them. Right. So, this is Marketplace, and everybody remembers the Imaginarium Theatre here?
Yeah.
Yeah? And they had like a little tent here, didn't they? Which was like a roundhouse type of thing, didn't they? That was interesting, wasn't it? Yeah. What happened to Imaginarium? They have the bistro as well. No, we won't go into it now, but I want to give you a bit of historical context of them being here.
Yeah. Marquee
And-
was a great addition though, wasn't it?
It was.
I like the marquee. Well, the marquee was actually based...
The Elizabethan Fair, which is the 7th of June, there will be similar.
Oh, right, okay. Well, that marquee was actually based upon the original roundhouse that was here. So there's the old roundhouse that was here, and that dates from 1760, that drawing, which was just approximately about here somewhere. That was only a few hundred yards from where that marquee was there. Now, the interesting thing about that roundhouse, that drawing was from 1760, is that started off as a temporary wooden structure, right? Much in the same way that the structure of the Imaginarium roundhouse was here. It was temporary in nature, and it wasn't meant to be there for long. They also had stocks here, and they had a cross. They had fish slabs here. If you've seen a fish slab, but that was like a cold stone slab where people from fishermen would put their fish on. It's meant to keep the fish cool. There are still some fish slabs in Pontyfield over there. Anyway, they had various things here, but they had this temporary wooden structure that eventually became a stone structure. Now, what the Imaginarium were doing was very much the same. They had a temporary structure. Now, if it had been allowed, as it was in medieval times, they would have eventually built a stone structure, and it would have become a permanent feature of the landscape. So they were doing something very similar, but they were doing something more interesting in actual fact, because the bells, because down Kemble Street here, which was then called Hillock Street, a little boy was born down there in 1757. Little boy was born, and he became known well, he didn't become known. He was baptised in the church there, and that's him there. Okay, that's him there. It looks very film. Yeah, that was John Philip Kemble, and he was born there on the 1st of February on Hillock Street at 93 Hillock Street, only a few doors from where I grew up. And he became one of England's greatest Shakespearean tragedians, actors. But he also lived there with his family, the Kembles, in lodging houses at 93 Kemble Street. Kemble Street was renamed after him. And he lived with his sister, who was Sarah Siddons, another actress, and I think Sarah Siddons was a much better actress than John Philip Kemble. Well, I came across a press cutting from about 50 years after John Philip Kemble died, basically. It was in the local paper. And it talked about the Kembles in Kemble Street. And there was an old tannery at that side of town, and it was in a square, like a proper theatre outdoor thing. And it actually reported that the Kembles used to use that as a rehearsal space and putting on shows at the other end of Kemble Street, much in the same way that Imaginarium were doing here in what they were doing. It was like a little community theatre thing. So there are links to the past, and Shakespeare wrote once that, you know, the wheel has turned full circle in The Tempest. That was a quote from The Tempest. The wheel has turned full circle, and it seems like everything goes round in cycles, you know. And it's the same with the theatre being there. Well, it was there in the past, and it's like that's gone round in circle. It's in a circle. Now, there was also a report that his sister, Sarah Siddons, who was originally Sarah Kemble, so she became Sarah Siddons. Well, I'll just remind you of the town. That's the old town hall. And the town hall was built in 1755. The town hall actually stood here. So where this embankment is now, it went up the hill there. So you can imagine that. On the second floor, this was 1755, this was built, by the way. Sarah Siddons was much older than John Kemble, John Philip Kemble, and it was said that she made her first performance in the town hall on the second floor, which was built like a theatre. It's an early theatre. So that's where the Kemble's career in acting actually started, which I find is fascinating. I find that a fascinating connection from the past to the present. And I was given this photo. You can have a look round. Nothing puts you in touch with the past better than touching something from the past, and that's John Philip Kemble's house at 93 Kemble Street. I'll pass it round. You can have a look at that. That's the original photo. That's John Hobbins, who I found out recently was a relative of an old school friend of mine, which I found really interesting. Now, John Philip Kemble, the great tragedian, died in 1823. 2 years after his death, somebody published a biography of John Philip Kemble, and this is a first edition of that biography. This was published in 1825, 2 years after he died, basically. And it's the first mention of him being born in Prescot. You can see his thing there. So that to me is like touching Shakespeare's first folio. having that. Okay, I'm going to pass it round. You can have a look through it, flip through it.
Did you say who was that standing outside the house?
That's John Hobbins, who had the house in the 1950s, and that's he lived there basically. He was a relative of a person I went to school with, who gave me that photo. So, yeah. This photo actually stood in the hallway of that building, in a frame, obviously. So it's good to be in touch with the past and to have things that that make that connection. So I thought I'd bring that along to show you. I don't know how people are doing for time at the moment, but shall we round it up here?
Yeah, we're okay for a little bit longer.
Are you okay for a bit longer?
A little bit more than
Oh, okay then. All right then. Okay, I wasn't sure whether we were going to do that, but yeah, we can do that. Okay.
How far down was his house? How do you remember Hector Stanley's?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
It's much further.
Was it further?
It was
along?
much further than that. It was by not far from the Bath Springs.
Oh yeah, I know the Bath
It was where Beaconsfield
where
flats are now. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you about why. Do you know why it's called the Bath Springs?
The Bath Springs.
Have they changed it back to the John Kemble now or something?
It's closed now. It's
Isn't it the nursery?
the nursery.
it's
Been a while since.
yeah. It's the
Came John Kemble one night.
Yeah.
I rang a taxi and I said, I'm outside. I'm sure they called the pub the John Kemble.
yeah. It was the John Kemble.
I said, I'm outside the John Kemble in Kembleton.
Yeah.
Taxi pulled up to the. Are you John Kemble?
Did you say yeah?
I didn't want to argue with him.
All right. Thank you. So it was called the Bath Springs because there was a brewery called the Bath Springs from St Helens. It was a St Helens. Well, it started off in Newton Le Willows, and they called it the Bath Springs. That's how it got its name. It's one of the few Bath Springs still in existence. But yeah,
I don't know if you did say whether I misheard. Did you mention about the lockup that was here as well?
yeah, the lockup.
But stone.
Yeah, well, the lockup was actually. I've got a photo here. The lockup was here. That's where the lockup was.
In this vicinity.
It was in that building.
Yeah.
So the building was here. Imagine that building towering above you. And it came down to approximately this corner here, around here, and went up the hill there. So that's where the lockup was there. And also, I'll see if it's on there. There were steps. In fact, it's not on that one.
And the infamous alphabet stone as well.
Yeah, the alphabet stone was above the lockup actually. I've got.
To read the letters, and if they couldn't say the alphabets, they could read it.
Yeah.
They were locked up.
Yeah, the alphabet stone. You can see a later photo. The alphabet stone was actually here, which there was a door there that's been blocked up in this later photo from the 1960s. So there was an alphabet stone there. Okay, that was the lockup. But if we look at an earlier photo, let's see if I can find one.
But weren't some of these knocked down because they were going to build a big wide road?
Yeah. It was a 73-foot motorway, dual carriageway, straight through here. And they were all needlessly knocked down because they ended up not building it. So it was going to go from there, from very edge there, to the very edge here. It's going to go right down there, swing right round here where the Shakespeare North is there, and down Liverpool Road.
What year was that?
That was in the 1960s, so late 1960s. They were planning on doing that, but they did prepare for it because they did knock all the buildings down, all the historic buildings. And there was a campaign to try and save this building because it's one of the finest buildings in southwest Lancashire and the only one with a curved frontage like this. It was beautiful. And this photo actually shows this doorway here was the entrance to the old Bell pub. So that's a lost pub of Prescot. There used to be a Bell sign on the outside there, but that was the public house that used to sit here as well. So there were over 40 pubs in Prescot back in the day. and there were only 400 people who lived here. So, yeah.
Party time, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was party time, they had a great time.
How many is that per person, per pub?
There were 10 in each pub every night. Yeah, they were all over the place. Could you imagine that? They weren't allowed to drink in public, by the way. It was against the law to drink in public. So they all shook. That's very true. So, yeah, we can go on for a bit if you want, or we can just
Could we go down,
round it up.
just down this main street?
We'll do a bit down Main Street. I'll tell you a bit about the watch factories down there as well. Yeah, so we can
We're
go.
just going to end up at the end there.
Yeah, okay, we can do that. Yeah, so this is Eccleston Street. It's not the High Street, it's Eccleston Street. People do call it the High Street, but it's not. The High Street's over there. It's had several names in its history. It's been known as Newgate Street, which is a Viking name for a new gate, new street, basically. And it's also become known as Fountains Lane because there used to be wells going all the way down. There's an underground water stream going down here, and that's why this street is here, in actual fact, because of that underwater thing. And they, all on this side of the street anyway, would dig a hole in the shop or the premises to access the well. But in the middle of winter, they had problems because we get a lot of rain coming down stuff. And they would just, like, the pressure of the water underground would push the water up through the cellars and the buildings, and it would flood down the street, and it became Fountain Street because of all these underground spurts coming out. Basically, the water was coming from what is now Lord Derby's estate, but originally it came from Martin Mere, which was one of the biggest lakes in southwest Lancashire, and that's where the water was draining down from, and eventually down to the Mersey. So it's had several names, but it's always been a main thoroughfare off Market Street. It developed from Market Street up here, but originally these were all residential buildings. Now, I just want to draw your attention to this alleyway here. This alleyway has just been recently gated off. That gate that wasn't there a few weeks ago, so they put a new gate over there. But this alleyway here, unassuming, has always been unassuming, but it's actually got a name. So this was known as Bradshaw's Court. This is Bradshaw's Court. Went down here, there were houses down here. This is a new build, and it went to what became known as Back Eccleston Street. And Back Eccleston Street was the home and workshop of a person called Harry Pybus. And Harry Pybus was Prescot's very last independent watchmakers. He had his studio there, he had his watchmaking factory there, and he died in 1952. And when he died, there was another campaign, great campaign, to save that watch factory. It had all the tools and stuff, which eventually went to the museum, and there was a display on Prescot Museum in the 1980s. If you saw that museum display, all them tools and the way it was laid out as if it was Harry Pybus's workshop. It was the end of an era of watchmaking in Prescot. The watchmakers thrived in Prescot for almost 200 years, producing some of the world-class watches and they were kind of like the iPhones of their day. They were really high quality products, and they were made possible because of things called outriggers, which were family run businesses, basically, where all the family got involved. There's a lot of children doing watchmaking, and it took about 104 people to make one single watch, because each person would specialize just on one part. Each family would just produce spindles, or they'd just produce springs or hands for the watch, or plates, watch plates, and various things like that. And then it would go into other factories to be assembled. And it started out with clock making, because clocks were bigger than watches, and eventually went down into watchmaking, which Prescot became a world leader. Sadly, it was not to be. We had too much competition from America and Switzerland, and they came over here, nicked all our ideas, and they basically they were looking at it from a new perspective, and they started mechanizing everything and mass producing stuff, and they were doing a better job of making it much cheaper. So the writing was on the wall for Prescot watchmaking. It's a shame it wasn't saved. It was eventually demolished in about 1954, and that was the end of watchmaking. Well, it wasn't quite the end, because down at the bottom there, you can see from this point of view, you can see the Flatiron building with the clock on at the bottom. That they were still making clocks and watches there, but it was kind of like a bit more industrialized there. They had little workshops in it, and that started off as a storage unit for the Lancashire Watch Company. But like I said, there is a link to watchmaking and the BICC, because we had skilled metal workers in Prescot. At the end of that time, about 1890, when it was really running down, the Atherton brothers came together and decided a new future for Prescot. Okay, wasn't that fantastic? Battery ran out on the old camera, so I'm in the Tesco's car park now, where I'm parked up. Unusual for an end sequence for the walk, but I hope you enjoyed that walk around Prescot. I hope you found it very informative. It was a spontaneous walk. I wasn't quite sure which direction we were going to go in or what we were going to talk about, but it is what it is. So I hope you've learned something. I hope you found it interesting. So, and I'd like to thank Diane Williams for organising the walk, part of the volunteers group for the Shakespeare North. And obviously it's a Monday, so the Shakespeare North isn't open on a Monday, so it's a day off for the volunteers there. So I hope they've enjoyed themselves. So whenever you go to the theatre, they're the people who are responsible for looking after you, showing you to your seats, and whatever else is needed when you go and see a show at the Shakespeare North. The Shakespeare North is a charity, by the way. You may not think it, but it is, and it is subsidised by the Arts Council and also by people going to the theatre. So it's important that you support the theatre. I'm a great supporter of the theatre. I think it's great for Prescot, and I hope you do as well. So if you've enjoyed that, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, leave a comment down below, and share on your social media feed. And if you've enjoyed this, I hope to see you again in another vlog, possibly even a guided walk. Tell me what you think of these guided walks and whether I should be filming them. I'm trying to take you along with me, but if you feel that they're not the kind of thing you want, or it's something else you want, then let me know, and I'll be most obliging. So thanks for watching, and from the Tesco's extra car park in Prescot, where you can just see the steeple of St Mary's Church, bye for now. Bye.
Lives in every street, echoes where past and present meet. Prescot town's treasure found, ancient magic all around. Time moves slow, but memories hold stories worth their weight in gold. Walk this town where legends grow, centuries of tales bestow. Timber frames and rustic charm, ancient signs that disarm. Prescot breathes with life anew, every corner has a view. Timber frames and rustic charm, ancient signs that disarm. Prescot breathes with life anew, every corner has a view.